Welcome to Global Ecommerce Leaders Podcast. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I am Jim Okamura.
Welcome back, Jim. It's great to be on the mic with you again. We actually just saw each other a couple of days ago here in Toronto. How was your trip? How was your travel? How are you?
Doing really fine, thanks, Michael. Again, good to see you along with so many of our global partners in Toronto recently.
Yeah, you had the Ebeltoft meeting. I want to ask you more about that later on in the episode because it was great to sit, and thanks for inviting me. We walked around one of the big shopping centers in Toronto, Yorkdale, which is actually a very, very, very productive shopping center. It's a good place to spend some time. You did some other things and had some other meetings, so we get a bit of, true to our calling here. We get a bit of global input overall for this episode. Now, this episode is ostensibly dedicated, so to speak, to a dessert, so to speak. It's a dessert from the dinner that we had in New York City a couple of weeks ago, and thanks to our two presenting sponsors at Channel Engine and at Livingston International, who helped bring us together. And it was a wonderful time. It was wonderful to see everyone. It had been a while, right? And so I hope it for you and Scott, and for me too. It was good to get back in the room and start talking about global commerce. Yeah.
Yeah, and what a dinner it was, right? It turned out fabulously wonderful to just pull the Global Ecommerce Leaders Forum community together, even in a smaller event, like this. But certainly it felt rather natural to again gather some of the executives who have been very involved, with the GELF community over the years. They were many of the same people who told us earlier in the year when we were doing our Future of GELF study that how much they need the community that GELF really represents, and so. Yeah, the dinner worked out, really well. We had a wonderful, group together. Again, big shout out to the Channel Engine and Livingston International sponsors and some of their, key people who came out and really added to the conversation, overall.
Yeah, I thought there was a lot of muscle memory, so to speak, in the room. Like it felt like no time had passed in some ways, right? It was like, let's get back talking about these important issues to the people who were in the room. And I felt like the vibe was it's good to be back and being able to talk with colleagues who do the same thing. I know from the volume, at some point I had to, at my table, I had to raise my voice because the volume, and it was a nice room at Upland in New York, that the volume of chatter, if you measure engagement over a dinner by the volume of chatter, the volume was cacophonous sometimes. People were very excited to chit and chat. And it was great, like I said, to break bread with everyone. Now, so this was the NYC reboot dinner, and as a part of an overall strategy for getting the community back together and rebuilding or resetting GELF. Talk about where it fits and what the purpose of the dinner was, just in case anybody missed our last episode, and it informs us for thinking forward.
Yeah, really, we really set up this New York reboot dinner, as we aptly named it, as a prelude for what's coming next, with the Global Ecommerce Leaders Forum. And so it was really nice to be able to not only welcome the crowd, but again, talk about what's coming next, right? And we'll talk about that, in a minute or so. But I think it really was, great to see some of these people and hear from them in terms of what's been going on the international, front for them, right? This, of course, has been a tumultuous year in global trade, you could say.
Yeah.
And so, perhaps, ironically, this is where the GELF community is more important, than ever. And I think for a lot of these same, senior leaders who have international or global commerce responsibility within their brands, you could tell that, by that cacophony that was happening.
Yeah. And so we don't want to dwell on the purpose of the event itself from a GELF structure perspective. We'll talk about that. But really, you had a few thoughts or kind of guiding questions as we went in. There was, we weren't doing PowerPoint presentations or anything like that, but we did want to have some I don't know, we call them facilitating questions, or at least a framework for what people were thinking about. Take us through what you had sent an email to the many folks attending, and said, here, these are the topics we're thinking. Do these resonate? And at your table, I know you moved around for some tables. Did they resonate with the many folks who joined us?
I believe so. And again, this is really part of an ongoing conversation we've had with so many of these same executives. Topics that have been raised as we have bounced the idea of a global experts workshop or symposium that we are planning for the first quarter of 2026. So we have been actively seeking what are the big challenges that global brands are facing, especially those who have what we consider to be quite complex go-to-market approaches internationally, right? In other words, there's no one way of kind of going global these days. And that's really where over the past several years now at GELF, while we still have e-commerce in our name, certainly we are talking as well on wholesale strategies, for example, and how we are using distributors and sometimes long-standing distributor relationships, internationally. So things like that, it's been great to get the feedback from people. And so some of the topics, that have come up, are big issues in my mind, at least, things like managing brand integrity. How are global brands really making sure that they're staying on brand while they're working with this vast ecosystem of partners? In some cases, partners that they have been using for decades, right? So again, brand integrity, I would say, is kind of at the top of the pyramid, but kind of closely related to that, topics like organization design for global commerce. We've seen over the years, we've done work on things like centers of excellence or innovation, very controlled from the center versus perhaps a very decentralized or localized, model. So we see that pendulum kind of swinging, too far in both ways in often case. So under today's, kind of global trade environment, how are companies not only structuring, their teams, but that, org design, of course, always is inclusive of process and importantly, metrics, right? What are those KPIs that we're really using to drive and motivate, teams at whether it's at the central level or at the local level? Pricing architecture is something that has come up, quite often. And I think in a tariff influence world that we're now working within, what does that mean for our prices that we would have and how that might differ from, our domestic markets versus, international markets? And how do we communicate some of those, to the local consumers, why this price is what it is? Obviously, like the consumers around the world have the ability to compare prices. What does this same product cost, in this market versus that market? So these are tough issues that, a lot of these same brands, have kind of said to us. Last, kind of topic that we think is very important is how are global brands managing cross-channel data? Right. So again, as more brands deploy their selling strategies, from their own direct commerce through marketplaces, through distributors, through wholesale arrangements, with various, retailer partners, how are they taking this volumes of data, right, and really trying to make sense of it, right? So all those are big, juicy topics, right, that we could really be diving into. And that's why we thought that, in this global experts, workshop, we want this to be as very hands-on. Let the brands talk to each other. We know that is really the power of the community. When you bring a group like this together and they get to hear from each other, right? I mean, one thing to listen to us talking, but hearing from each other is really what, facilitates, I think, solutions.
Yeah, I like that word facilitate because in my mind and the experts format, it's really we're facilitating the content versus we are, of course, bringing the content, but we're bringing more context and facilitation because these people do this on an everyday basis. They're all, of course, looking for insights from us and other experts around, shared interests. And what resonated with me at my table, we had a great free, wide-ranging discussion about the future performance of retail, some of the challenges of maintaining margin in a tariff environment. I think you're starting to see some of that with brands putting price increases. We're starting to see some news about that. And interesting you mentioned pricing integrity, because, in my world, here in Canada, it was generally you could see pricing was the exchange rate plus or minus, right? As a consumer, you could get your head around if it was $10 in the US, it was, depending on the rate, it could be $13 in Canada. I mean, it was kind of math, right? And now we've got this very interesting dynamic on the one hand where you could have goods that are coming into Canada from, say, China or Vietnam or wherever that are not tariffed for the same brand, and the pricing could be significantly different. And or maybe those products land in Canada via the US and then they're the same. So then you're back to pricing with a currency in mind, currency valuation in mind, the Canadian dollar versus the US dollar. And we just talked about how this issue replicates itself around the world, really, right?
Absolutely.
So your pricing integrity discussion, we spent a fair bit of time talking about that because, it used to be kind of just math, plus or minus, not tariffs are not all new, but they're at a different level. And then that gets to, well, should we still be bringing product into Canada from the U.S. If we bring that product in and it's got a 47% tariff rate versus no tariff rate practically? Canada has the CETA agreement, the CETA trade agreement with European nations, for example, Asian. We've got trade agreements. So does that rewire the supply chain in interesting ways? Is that effort even worth it? Because it's not without a fair significant of effort, both intellectually and finding the right partners. But then the partners can kind of have that opportunity to say, listen, we're going to help you move those goods and reduce the friction of perhaps a more complicated or complex situation, and both in Canada and around the world. We also talked about AI, of course. I mean, you can't have a dinner these days without talking about AI. Can't have a podcast without saying it. And it was just really in the context of two things. One is the level of disruption in you think you got it all figured out. I don't know if anybody says they got it all figured out, but you think you got a handle on things, and then you've now got this AI that can both be a blessing. I'm not sure it's yet a curse, but it definitely kind of starts to mix with marketplaces, because you're starting to see some very busy activity from the AI in the AI space with conversion and current, not currency, but transactions within AI platforms within marketplaces. So now you've got this almost like this doll within each other, and you start pulling it apart, and there's several even more layers, all of which is figure outable. It's fast moving, and certainly the people that I talk to in that room are some of the best in the business at figuring these things out. But it did. And just echoing all the way back to the beginning of your conversation, it was great to be at the table. We're talking to people who had the same challenges. They talked about people in the context of, well, how many people does it take now to create at scale the images and the content that AI demands? But you've got AI, and you're using AI to do that. So you've got almost you've almost got this arms race between how much content AI demands and how much you can produce with AI, and then right up the center of that is brand. I mean, is this on brand integrity? Are we? We have to be careful. I don't know about you. I'm seeing all these videos in the social platforms. Sometimes, like, I see gorillas talking, and they look very real. These dogs is my favorite, actually. The dogs kind of telling jokes. My God, they look so real, right? I mean, you got to look twice at some of these things. And so then you've got ideas around what, how far to take that, how that can be used strategically. So it was a fascinating conversation. Now, let me ask you this question, as I know you move table to table. And did you hear anything that surprised you? I mean, I wasn't surprised by the enthusiasm in the room. I mean, we really had a core group of people who've been, who came and were able to come, and many more who just weren't able to join us that night, very enthusiastic about the community. But did anything surprise you, the amount of change, even in the run-up? There was a fair bit of change in the people that we were talking to in terms of changing careers. That was, if not surprising, interesting to see. Some moved completely out of international commerce. Some just moved around different roles. But, as you reflect on the evening, it's like, wow, I wasn't expecting to hear that. Or anything catch you off, not off guard, but anything come to mind?
If anything, it really was great to hear how things haven't changed. right?
Oh,
That these
interesting.
same, global executives still, despite these macro headwinds that we're dealing in regulatory issues and so on, that, they still have a job to do. They're still, looking to grow their brands internationally. Now, how they do that is changing, and that didn't surprise me, right? And I think that's exactly why we try to facilitate these discussions, and in a lot of ways, it was reassuring to see that it's still business as usual on the global front. Doesn't make it any easier, right?
Right. Business as unusual, yeah.
Yeah, it's just nice to kind of see just that even though we haven't gathered this gang in a little while here, they're still problem solving on the global front, and they're saying that they can't do it alone. I mean, I think that's what makes us a great community is that we've always said it clearly takes a village, right? And the ecosystems really required to go international can be quite complicated. But at the same time, it's just that kind of resolve that we see with a lot of these global executives, saying, okay, we've faced difficult challenges before. We can figure this out.
Yep.
Right? And that's down to what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, resilience, agility, all these things were kind of through lines of the conversations I was listening to, and as you said, a familiar note in not a nostalgic way, but hey, it's great to be back. And what I took away from that is kind of we moved past the night. We kind of sketched out what GELF would look like in the next 6 months, what events would take place, and we certainly got. I know I bounced the ideas off the community because we both want to be serving the community and we want to need their support to attend. And but is there an appetite for what we're offering? So take everyone through the kind of the outline of what we're planning for the next 6 months to engage, reactivate, and help the international community.
Yeah, no, again, we were very happy to be able to announce at the Reboot dinner what's next, for the Global Ecommerce Leaders Forum. And so, one of the things that you and I have talked about that I'm very excited to kind of get off the ground is more of a virtual event, but something that a topic that's very near and dear to us. What's happening in the Canadian market these days? Yeah. As most of you would know, for especially U.S.-based brands, Canada represents, the biggest international market. No surprise there, right? So again, how's the Canadian business performing? Would be kind of the question to ask. Many of the brands who are involved, with GELF. So looking forward to kind of hosting a virtual webinar on this topic. Stay tuned on dates and speakers and so on.
Roughly December, right? So we're not quite exactly on the date, but. We want to get past Black Friday and get past Cyber Monday and the movement of goods. So basically, we want to get it done this calendar year in 2025. And we're thinking kind of the first week of December or the second week of, not too close to the holidays either, right? But just get something in because it's really a planning for next year. We're not really gonna you're not gonna learn anything. You're gonna do anything for the holiday season. But we want everybody to be in that kind of trough of activity after all the great numbers of orders and boxes have shipped and moved. And
exactly.
The O Canada live stream. Let's talk about, we'll talk about Canada a bit. What else do we got after that for 26?
Well, so similar to gathering our New York GELF community, we wanted to do a similar dinner for our West Coast community. So traditionally, we've always done a Los Angeles conference early in the year. We're probably looking to that early February timeframe to host an LA GELF community dinner. So really looking forward to hearing from some of the same West Coast executives. Many of them we did invite to New York, and then so it was just wonderful to hear from some of those people who said, well, make sure you let us know when you're gathering the gang out in LA. So that's certainly on the agenda. And then as we've already alluded to, this global experts workshop or symposium, that's going to be a little bigger event, not something that we clearly want to gather like a significant number of big mature global brands those who really have, I would say, the complexity of their global growth strategies that, they really want to come together. We talked about some of the topics that we'd be covering, and we're very excited to kind of host something like that. So there's 3 events that we have kind of in the works, right now.
Yeah.
But we're definitely kind of appealing to the entire community to give us feedback. What is keeping you up at night when it comes to international trade? And how can GELF help facilitate some of this discussion? Because we want to hear from the community. So please don't hesitate to reach out, to any of us, in terms of what are the topics that we should be covering as we gather the GELF community.
Well, as I turn my mind to 2026, roughly the LA Reboot dinner is probably in the month of February. Nice time to get out of Chicago and Toronto, go west to a little better temperature than, as you said, Q1 for the morning symposium, or however we structure that. But again, focused on the experts, and then we assess and see where we go from there. Now, that's enough about the GELF agenda, so to speak. Now, you and I, as I mentioned off the top, are together in Toronto, and you're part of the Ebeltoft group, which is I don't know if you call it a federation, but a group of global consultants that get together under an umbrella to share best practices and insights. And I met such interesting people, your colleagues, professional colleagues, and had lots of great discussions. But as you all got together for a couple of days, what'd you hear? What'd you hear from Poland? What did you hear from Portugal? What did you hear from we had New Zealand represented? You had such a great breadth. I guess kind of like the dinner, anything jump out at you for our community, the GELF community, that you'd want to share?
Well, the Ebeltoft group has been going now for over 25 years, and I've been, part of that group for almost that entire time. So over the years, we have built up, wonderful relationships and certainly learned from each other. Twice a year, we get together, usually once in Europe and once somewhere else in the world. And it was Toronto's turn to host, these meetings. So over several days, we have what I think is a great, format. We love to go out and see retail, right? So again, we're not sitting in a meeting room, for those entire few days. Most of the time we're out in the field. We're out, checking out new concepts, and many companies are happy to host us as well, which is kind of nice. So between just that kind of mix of, meeting and kind of getting out to see new concepts, there's always, great, conversation time with a lot of our colleagues. And that's where, certainly, no surprise here, the big topic is still AI, right? How is AI affecting our clients' businesses, around the world? How is AI, affecting our own consulting practices, and professional services, in general? So again, there were lots of very, I think, productive conversations that we had, as it relates to just this freight train that we can call AI coming down the line. And certainly that's where, we're all very curious and closely watching this important holiday shopping season just to see, well.
It's the first AI, I've heard it referred to as the first AI holiday, which is, from a consumer's perspective, I think correct.
Yeah, exactly. And that is where, almost every week you can see kind of new announcements, leading up to this key shopping season in terms of in different shopping functionalities, say within the agentic AI world, and where agents are going to be shopping on behalf of, consumers. Well, obviously very early days, for that yet, but there's so many I would say comparisons, to our early work in the internet and e-commerce, right? I mean, what did we learn, back 25 years ago or longer? You and I were both, like involved in the early e-commerce, days. And so, but yet this feels different in that, the acceptance rate on the part of, both consumers and companies, the steepness of that curve is just going to be phenomenal, right? And so again, unlike, where, we had to do a lot of preaching. We were on our soapbox a lot in the early days of, e-commerce, really trying to convince the skeptics, right, that they need to, again, get their heads and arms around, what's coming. I don't think we have that issue here, right? I think, every company is kind of looking at AI and how that's going to affect their business. And certainly for us in the consulting world, we're looking at how is that affecting our clients' business. So that was a big one, a big topic of discussion. But certainly, just some other practical notes as well. We have the big NRF Big Show conference coming up in New York in early January. And for our global partners, we have colleagues, coming from around the world, often, bringing, many clients with them. So we are trying to combine forces, so to speak, in terms of what are we doing not only at the conference, but again, out in the field, visiting stores, what's new, what's exciting, what are those little nuggets of ideas that we can take away from visiting some of the cool New York stores that we can kind of bring back to our respective, markets and clients, and just so again, things like that are very exciting. True to our global nature of the Ebeltoft Group, of course, we weren't only talking about the big show for NRF, but I find it interesting just how quickly NRF Europe and NRF APAC have been kind of gathering momentum, right? So certainly from some of our APAC members there, some of whom are on the advisory board for that particular show, they're saying, what are we doing to, again, really support, that kind of crowd and that community that's really starting to build. So really interesting to kind of see the NRF, spread their wings and seemingly be, quite effective, in some of their own, global expansion strategies.
Well, it's a super interesting point and probably beyond the scope of the podcast, but how, the NRF is reaching out and not saying everything happens in New York City. Things happen also in this case in Paris and in Singapore, where they go out and facilitate those conversations. And of course, I'm a big fan of the NRF. This week, the big news is I was named as one of the top 50 retail voices by NRF for 2026. So
congratulations.
Thank you. I will be, of course, at the show. And Steve Dennis and I actually have a podcast studio on the show floor. So stop by the fishbowl and wave hi, maybe sprinkle a few flakes in case we get hungry on the show floor, because you know how busy it is. But it's a bold adventure. So everyone will be together in New York. We're not going to do an event as GELF in New York. Everybody's so busy, but there'll be lots of time for casual chit chat, and it's a great time if you're in the town and you want to connect with Jim or I or any of your colleagues. Let us know, and there's always a place for a coffee on that show floor. Or stand in line in Starbucks for an hour and get a coffee, but have a good meeting before that macchiato arrives with your name on it. Well, all right. Well, listen, great episode in terms of just bringing people up to speed. We're going to continue to do these episodes and we're going to pop in with sometimes news that we hear from around the industry. And so we might do that before we do the Canadian Canada live stream. But let's sign off for there now. And Jim, safe travels, and I hope everybody has safe travels. And we'll be back with more information about, first of all, the 26 events, but also our perspectives on what we continue to hear, because we're engaging with the community almost every day. So, Jim, thanks for joining me on the mic.
Great. Good to talk to you.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure and give us that 5-star rating and follow us on your favorite podcast platform, and check out our newly refreshed YouTube and LinkedIn pages. If you are a retailer or brand located in the New York area and are interested in joining us for dinner Wednesday, October 22nd, please reach out to myself or Jim on LinkedIn. We'd love to meet you.